This is the story of Aaron Daniel Whitfield and his fiancée Megan Claire Sutherland. They had been together for 4 years before the ring appeared, long enough that the proposal felt less like a beginning and more like a formality. Both of them had been quietly dreading and quietly wanting in equal measure. Aaron loved Megan the way a person loves a place they grew up in, deeply, habitually, with a vague awareness that something about it no longer quite fits. Megan loved Aaron the way some people love security, not coldly, not cynically, but with a particular tenderness of someone who has confused comfort with devotion for so long that the two have become indistinguishable. What neither of them said aloud in the months before everything came apart was that they had slowly been building a life together without ever confirming they wanted the same life. The crack was always there, it just took pressure to find it. The car was a 2019 Mustang GT, Velocity Blue, and Aaron had owned it for 3 years before he met Megan. He'd bought it after his father died. Not as a tribute to anything, not as an act of grief rebellion, but simply because he'd needed something that felt like his. Something that answered only to him. He kept it cleaner than his apartment. On Sunday mornings, if Megan slept in, he'd take it out alone on the state highway east of town. Windows down, nothing playing on the stereo. Just the engine and the road doing what they were made to do. Megan knew what the car meant to him. She didn't resent it exactly. But there were moments, small, domestic moments, when the car sat in the driveway like a third presence in their relationship, one she hadn't invited and couldn't quite argue with. They lived together in a 2-bedroom rental in Ashford, a mid-sized town in upstate New York, where winters arrived early and people stayed longer at their jobs than they planned to. Aaron was a structural engineer for a civil contracting firm. Megan worked in marketing for a regional healthcare company. They made good money together, not remarkable money, and their apartment reflected that, comfortable, tasteful in a catalog way, evidence of two people who had gradually merged their preferences without either of them fully noticing. They were happy. Or they performed happiness so consistently that the performance had become its own kind of truth. On a Tuesday evening in early October, Megan made pasta with the garlic bread Aaron liked, and they ate at the kitchen table instead of in front of the television, which was unusual enough that Aaron noticed it. She'd lit candles. Not romantic candles. Just 2 small ones from a set her mother had given her, placed without ceremony near the window. "Sophie called today," Megan said. Aaron reached for the bread. Sophie was Megan's younger sister, 26, who had moved to Portland 2 years ago to work at a nonprofit and had been, in the careful shorthand both Aaron and Megan used, struggling to find her footing. What this meant, in practice, was that Sophie made decisions that confused Aaron, expensive decisions made on a nonprofit salary, emotional decisions made without apparent forethought, and that Megan absorbed the consequences of those decisions the way a good older sister does, quietly, partially, with love that occasionally curdled into something harder. "How is she?" Aaron asked. "She's behind on rent, 3 months. Megan said it evenly, the way you say something you've been rehearsing. Her roommate left in July and she's been covering the full amount herself. She didn't tell me until now." "How much is the rent?" $1,400 a month. Aaron did the math without saying it. He set down his fork and looked at Megan and waited, because there was something in the angle of her shoulders that told him she wasn't finished. "She asked if we could help her get caught up, enough to keep her from being evicted. How much would that be?" $4,200. The candles flickered. Outside, someone's car passed with the bass up too high, then faded. "Megan," Aaron said carefully. "I know." She looked at her plate. "I know it's a lot." "It's not that it's a lot," he said. "It's that." He stopped. He didn't finish because he wasn't sure how to say what he actually meant, which was something like, "We do this. We always do this. And it never changes anything." Instead, he said, "Let me think about it." Megan nodded. She picked up her fork. They finished dinner talking about other things, a contractor issue at Aaron's office, a campaign she was running at work, and the conversation about Sophie settled beneath the surface of the evening like sediment. Later, Aaron stood at the kitchen sink rinsing dishes while Megan showered. He looked out the window at the driveway. The Mustang sat under the orange glow of the street lamp, blue turned almost black in the dark. He thought she didn't ask. She informed. He dried his hands and didn't say that either. 3 days passed before Megan brought Sophie up again. In those 3 days, Aaron noticed things he might not have noticed before, or things he had noticed and had chosen not to examine. The way Megan talked to Sophie on the phone with her voice pitched differently than it was with anyone else. Softer, more patient, more willing to absorb silences. The way she checked her phone during their evenings together with a frequency that suggested she was waiting for something. The way she didn't ask Aaron how he was thinking about the money, as though the question of whether or not they would send it had already been answered and she was simply waiting for him to catch up. He wasn't angry. That was the strange part. He was something quieter than angry, something more like watchful. On Friday evening, they sat on the couch together. Megan had a glass of wine. Aaron had a beer and was reading something on his phone he wasn't actually reading. The television was on, one of those home renovation shows where the dramatic problem is always resolved in 42 minutes. I was thinking, Megan said, we could transfer the money next week, give Sophie time to get the situation sorted before the end of the month. Aaron put his phone down. We haven't actually decided to send it. Megan looked at him, not with anger, with something more like recalibration. I thought we were in agreement. You said you'd tell me, and I said I'd think about it. That's not agreement. A pause. On the television, someone gasped at a revealed kitchen. She's my sister, Aaron. I know she is. She's in a bad situation. I understand that. He said it without sharpness, though he felt the sharpness available to him. But we sent her $1,800 in March, and before that, we covered her car payment twice when she was between jobs. And each time, there's been a reason, and the reason is always real, and then there's another reason. Megan set her wine glass down. So what are you saying? That we just let her get evicted? I'm saying I'd like to have an actual conversation about this, not be told what we're doing. The television filled the silence. I'm not telling you, she said, but her voice had tightened in a way that suggested she knew that wasn't entirely true. Aaron looked at her for a moment. Then he said carefully, I think sometimes you decide things and then present them to me in a way that makes disagreement feel like cruelty. And I go along because I don't want to be the person who let Sophie get evicted. But that's not a conversation. That's a script. Megan was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice had changed, gone softer, less offended. I don't mean to do that. I know you don't. She's all I have left of my family that actually. She stopped. Her jaw moved slightly, the way it did when she was keeping something in. Aaron waited. He wanted her to finish. He thought if she finished that sentence, something real might happen between them, some honest territory might open up, that they could actually stand in together. She didn't finish it. She reached for her wine instead. He looked away. On the screen, the couple was hugging in their new kitchen, thrilled. Aaron picked up his phone again. He wasn't reading anything. He was sitting with the feeling that he and Megan were separated by something thin but impermeable, like glass close enough to see each other clearly, too far to actually touch. Then, in the particular quiet of that moment, something happened that he would think about later and struggle to explain. Megan set down her glass again and looked at the middle distance and said in a tone that was utterly detached from the conversation they'd been having, I don't know. Maybe like this story, or subscribe or something. Aaron turned. What? She blinked. The color changed slightly in her face. Not embarrassment exactly, more like the expression of someone who had briefly left the room and returned to find themselves being watched. Nothing. Sorry. I don't know why I said that. Subscribe to what? I genuinely don't know. She shook her head. Forget it. He looked at her for another moment, then let it go. Some things you file away without knowing why. He didn't sleep well that night. The ultimatum didn't arrive the way Aaron would have expected if he'd expected it at all. Not in the heat of a fight, not after alcohol, not with Megan standing in a doorway with her voice raised. It came on a Saturday morning, 11 days after the dinner with the candles, delivered with the tone of someone who believed they were being reasonable. They were in the kitchen. Erin was making coffee. Megan was at the table with her laptop, ostensibly working, but he'd noticed she'd been on the same page for 20 minutes. I talked to Sophie again yesterday, she said. Okay. The landlord gave her until the 15th. Erin poured his coffee. That's 2 weeks from now. I know. A pause. Erin, I need us to figure this out. He turned around and leaned against the counter. He'd learned to read Megan's silences, and the one that followed felt loaded in a way the previous ones hadn't. I've been thinking, she said slowly, about the car. He went still. I know what it means to you. I do. But it's worth what, 30-something thousand? We could sell it, help Sophie get stable, and you could get something practical, something that makes more sense for us. The coffee was hot in his hands. He looked at her steadily. Something that makes more sense for us, he repeated. We're engaged. We're supposed to be building a life together. And holding on to something like that, something that's just about you. It's my car, Megan. I know it's your car. My car that I bought before I met you. With money I earned. That's mine. I know. Her voice had taken on a quality he recognized, the careful, patience of a reasonable person tone that she used when she believed she was being generous and was waiting for him to recognize it. But this is family, Erin. Sophie is going to be your family too. He set his mud down. Not hard, just set it down. Is this an ultimatum? She didn't answer immediately, which was its own answer. Megan. His voice was quiet. Are you telling me to sell my car, or? I'm saying that I need to know you're committed to us, to our future, to what actually matters. The kitchen was very still. Outside, a neighbor was mowing something. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice and stopped. Erin felt something clarify inside him, not angrily, not dramatically, but the way a room clarifies when someone turns on a light. Things that had been shapes in the dark became what they actually were. I've given money to your sister 3 times, he said. I've never once refused to talk about it. I've never made you feel guilty for caring about her. I've asked to be included in the conversation rather than handed a decision. That's what I've asked for. Megan's hands had stilled on the laptop. And what you're telling me, he continued, is that the measure of my commitment to you is whether I'll sell something that's mine when you ask me to. That's exactly what you said. Not unkindly, just exactly. And I need you to sit with that for a minute, because I am. The mower outside had stopped. The silence was complete. I'm not selling the car, Erin said. And I'm not saying that because the car matters more to me than you do. I'm saying it because what you're asking isn't really about the car. He paused. And if the answer to that question determines whether we stay engaged, then I think we need to talk about whether this is actually working. Megan looked at him. Something in her face had gone uncertain, not the confident, patient expression, but something beneath it, something younger and less defended. Are you ending this? She asked. He thought about it honestly. I don't know, he said, but I think you need to really consider what you just asked me to prove, and why. She closed the laptop. She didn't say anything else. He picked up his coffee, which had gone slightly cool, and he drank it standing at the window, watching the empty street. 2 days later, he moved out. He didn't leave in anger. He packed methodically, 2 trips with the Mustang, and left his key on the counter. Winter came early that year. By November, the town was gray and cold, and Megan had reorganized the apartment in small ways, moved the couch, replaced the dish rack, rearranged the spice cabinet that Erin had always kept in alphabetical order, because it was one of his small absurd habits that she'd mocked gently and, she realized now, depended on more than she'd known. She told the story to her friends in the weeks after Erin left in the way that people tell stories when they need the story to be a certain shape. She said he'd overreacted. She said he'd been selfish, that he'd chosen a car over his commitment to her family. She said it wasn't about the car, really, just wasn't ready for what a real relationship required. Her friends listened. Most of them said the right things. One of them, her oldest friend, Claire, who had known her since college and who operated without the social softness most people used, sat across from her at a wine bar in November and said, "Walk me through the actual conversation. What exactly did you say?" Megan walked her through it, carefully, with context, with the framing she'd developed over 6 weeks of returning to it. When she finished, Claire was quiet for a moment. "Megan," she said, "did you tell him to sell the car or you were done?" "I said I needed to know he was committed." "Did you use those words specifically?" A pause. "I was trying to communicate what I needed." Claire turned her wine glass. "Do you know what actually happened with Sophie's rent? Did you verify it? Did you ask for bank statements or anything?" Megan hadn't. It hadn't occurred to her to ask. Sophie had called, Sophie had cried, and Megan had believed her the way older sisters believe younger sisters when younger sisters are crying. It was her mother who told her the rest, not with cruelty, just in the course of a conversation in December. Sophie had, in fact, been behind on rent, but she had also, as it turned out, been spending on things that contradicted the emergency: a weekend trip to Seattle in September, new furniture she'd photographed for her social media, a gym membership she'd mentioned casually in a later call. The crisis had been real in some of its dimensions and performed in others. Sophie was struggling genuinely, but she had also, whether consciously or not, shaped the narrative to get what she needed. Megan sat with this for a long time. She didn't tell her friends about it. She let the version of events she'd constructed sit in place, load-bearing now, too embedded to dismantle without bringing down other things. But in the apartment at night, in the specific silence that a shared space develops when the person it was shared with is gone, she thought about what Claire had asked. Did you verify it? She had not. She had decided, and she had brought the decision to Aaron, and she had needed him to validate it by complying. And when he had asked instead to be treated as a partner when he had done, she understood now exactly what a healthy person in a healthy relationship would do. She had reframed his reasonableness as disloyalty. She had tested him. She hadn't planned to, but that's what it had been. She didn't allow herself to finish that thought entirely. She was good at not finishing thoughts that required her to see herself clearly. It was one of her oldest skills, but the thought remained unfinished, like a sentence with no period, suspended in the rooms she moved through alone. 5 months after he moved out, Aaron ran into Megan at the farmer's market on the east side of town. It was a Saturday in late March, one of those early spring days where the cold hasn't quite released its grip, but the light is different, brighter, less gray, with a quality that makes things look like themselves again. He saw her before she saw him. She was at a produce stand, a canvas bag over one shoulder, examining something: apples, he thought. She looked the same and slightly different in the way that people do after absence, familiar in all the wrong ways. He noticed her coat was one he hadn't seen before and that she'd cut her hair shorter. He considered leaving. He stayed. She turned and saw him, and her face did several things in quick succession before it settled. "Hey," she said. "Hey." He stopped at a reasonable distance. Not close, not far, the distance of people who know each other too well and are trying to find the right key to unlock an ordinary moment. "You look good," she said. "So do you." Neither of them said the obvious things. The market moved around them, families with strollers, a dog tied to a post, the ordinary textures of a weekend morning. "How's the car?" she asked. It wasn't sarcastic. He could hear that it wasn't. There was something genuine in it, or as close to genuine as she could manage at the specific pressure of running into someone you'd lost. "She's good," he said. "Just had her serviced." Megan nodded. A pause. "I've been thinking about things," she said. "Not the things, just things." As if there was a shared inventory they both had access to. "Yeah," he said. "Me too. I think She stopped, lifted the apples in her hand, and then back at him. "I think I approached things badly." He waited to see if there was more. There wasn't. Not quite. It was an incomplete sentence, an admission with its own soft walls, and he recognized it as the most she could give in this particular light, in this particular public space, with her pride still doing its necessary work. He didn't rush to fill the space with forgiveness or with bitterness. Both would have been too easy. "I know it wasn't just about the car," he said. "I knew that then." "Then why?" She stopped again. The question she almost asked was then, "Why didn't you stay?" He could see it. But she didn't ask it because she knew on some level what the answer would be. You don't stay to prove a point. You don't submit to a test and call it love. "Take care of yourself, Megan," he said. It wasn't cold. That was the thing she'd carry with her afterward, standing at the produce stand after he'd walked away. It wasn't cold. It wasn't performatively kind. It wasn't any of the shapes revenge takes when it's dressed up as peace. It was simply what it was, something true, said quietly, meaning exactly what it said. She watched him go. The Mustang was parked at the end of the lot. She could see the edge of it, blue in the March light. He got in, and the engine turned over, and he pulled out without looking back. She stood there for a moment longer than she needed to. The man at the produce stand asked if she wanted to keep the apples. She said yes. She paid. She walked to her car, a sensible silver sedan she'd had for 3 years and never thought much about. She drove home. She unloaded her groceries. She put the apples in the bowl on the counter, the bowl she'd chosen alone from a shop on 5th Street. 2 weeks after Aaron left, and she stood in the kitchen and looked at them and felt something settle in her chest that she didn't have a clean word for. Not grief exactly, not regret exactly. Something in between, something without a name, something that sits in a person the way old furniture sits in a room that's been rearranged, familiar, slightly out of place, quietly insisting on its own presence. She made coffee. She drank it at the table, alone, in the apartment that had slowly become only hers. Outside, spring was making its cautious return. Inside, she sat with the knowledge, not dramatic, not sudden, just there, that she had held something good in her hands and had mistaken the grip for ownership. The coffee cooled. She didn't reheat it. She sat there a while longer, just sitting, the way you sit when there is nothing left to decide.